You're good.
Opening session for February 21st. For a special session meeting. Do we have any public comments, Melanie?
Vice President Flores, there are no public comments.
Thank you, Melanie. We're going to retire to closed session to meet regarding conference with labor negotiations with SRTA, CSEA per Governing Code 54957.6. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Good evening. Thank you for attending the SRCS City School Board meeting, opening session for Wednesday, February 21st, 2024. Let's begin by taking the Pledge of Allegiance. Would you please stand up? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And apparently I have my camera off. Let me turn that on. Reports taken in closed session. No action taken in closed session. Moving on to C3. Public comments on agenda items only. And I see two cards here, two blue cards. First person we have is Jeff Gospi, followed by Sarah Jenkins. And then Melanie will have 3 minutes. Thank you. No, we cannot.
Okay. So my name is Jeff Gospi. I'm a lifelong resident of the district and have lived and worked in all 5 high school areas, as well as served on Santa Rosa City Schools Budget Advisory Committee, and am currently in my 4th term on the Rincon Valley School Board. Though my opinions tonight are mine alone, I'm not speaking on behalf of the Rincon Valley School District. You are right to seek unification. However, full unification to a single district will not meet the state's requirements, not only financially, but also in terms of substantial community identity, and most importantly, preserving and enhancing the quality of education for all students compared to what is currently available in the existing feeder districts. I disagree with the study's educational impacts analysis, which was superficially evaluated. The most viable option for unification, unfortunately, was not proposed for study by this board, which would be unification by high school to as many as 5 districts and possibly less. I agree with the potential cost savings and educational benefits to unification from TK through 12th grade. And as proof of community identity and simplicity, almost everyone in Rincon Valley District, as an example, assumes that our local elementary, middle, and high schools are in the same district. This is already the natural community identity and is likely similar for each of the other 4 high school areas. Each high school area has its own unique community and identity. We have decades of experience with unification between the Santa Rosa elementary and high school districts, including a shared superintendent, administration, and board, and yet Santa Rosa City Schools is not more efficient or effective. Unification into a single district citywide is highly likely to be even more bureaucratic and less responsive to the community identity and community needs. And local control over public education will be less responsive than under our current system. I believe the only viable path forward is some form of unification by high school area, which would shrink our 10 local districts by half.
Lo que estaremos mirando 10
We'll preserve what's working about our current system while being more financially viable and responsive to the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gosby. Can we have Sarah Jenkins?
A funny little microphone. All right. First, I wanted to just apologize.
Primero, solo
Well, wanted to apologize for not reading the material ahead of time, and I haven't been involved in a lot of these communications. So just take that with a grain of salt. I'm not able to access downloading the attachments on a phone, only a laptop. I'm not sure if everybody's aware of that. So I have a unique experience of having the opportunity in my career of doing classroom outreach in schools throughout the Greater Bay Area, including most of Santa Rosa. This includes classroom presentations as well as grade level and school-wide activities. This allowed access to work with staff, administrators, students, and parent volunteers in all districts of our community. While I can see benefits to combining districts, this is absolutely not something that should happen in the near future, as it would ultimately lower the educational output of all of our students, as it would take away from the districts that are currently successful. Alternatively, I would recommend success study groups and honest, transparent discussions with other boards to learn from them, and then implement change of our current procedures and policies. Another alternative would be to expand other districts to include high schools, so that families do not have to relearn and adjust their working knowledge of the school system at the same time their children are developmentally pushing away from those primary relationships. The disruption of that transition creates a further divide in social structures. It would also allow for more precise and cost-effective SRO programs based on the specific community need. As a side note of my all-time favorite school to visit due to like the solid community feel and general respect for all others on campus has always been Shepherd Elementary in the Roseland district. And I just suggest that to be a place to start with how we kind of model things off of. Thank you so much.
Thank you both. Do we have any more blue cards before moving on? No, thank you. That moves us to D1, discussion items. Superintendent Trunell.
Thank you, Vice President Flores, members of the board, those who are with us in person and online. Tonight, we bring the next phase of the unification report and feasibility study to the board. I would like to welcome Christy White to.
me gustaría invitar a Cristina White.
And I want to recognize that we have members from SCO also present, who are here to participate if a question happens, but will not be sitting at the podium to take part in the presentation. Ms. White, are you wanting me to share my screen while you go through, or is she going to? Okay, perfect. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Ms. White, and I see that she's getting help with the microphone. You can take mine if needed. It's just a quick, okay, take mine.
All right, I think we have it going. Good evening, board members, superintendent. It's really a pleasure to be here tonight. And the work that I'm going to be going over with you is the culmination of quite many months of study and exploration into the question of would a full unification of Santa Rosa City Schools and all of the feeder elementary districts meet the state's, feasibly meet the state's 9 criteria. So you have a report in front of you, and I'm just going to go through the slides. And if you have any questions at any point, please feel free to ask. So as you recall, this is the second part of a 2-part study. The first was on financial feasibility. It was conducted in the fall of 2022. And then on January 18th, about a year ago, the governing board here tonight asked that the scenario 1, the full unification, be studied. This study is being funded by the Sonoma County Office of Education. They're a neutral party in this question, as am I. And they hired me through a competitive selection process to conduct these studies. This is just an exploratory study. There is no petition at this time to unify any of the school districts that we're discussing here. So a little bit of background included are the 10 independent school districts. That includes 2 districts, which are comprise Santa Rosa City Schools, since you are a consolidated administration. The total enrollment is about 27,000 pupils, and there's 19 charter schools in the area as well, 50 school sites, and 5 comprehensive high schools within that. Demographically, the entire area is majority Hispanic, followed by white, and then the 14% balance is spread among 5 other ethnic and racial groups. A little over half of the pupils are eligible for free and reduced lunch, and there's a wide range of English language learners in each district, a low of 24% to a high of 93%. Right. Whoops, let's go back. Not sure how to go backwards here. Sorry, hang on one second. Okay. So a little bit about the methodology that we did in order to conduct the study. I solicited input from all of the affected school districts and on sending emails and requesting for interviews, and only Santa Rosa City Schools elected to fully participate. So I interviewed staff, I interviewed cabinet members and board members, and used the information that I obtained from the district in doing the study. I was also able to speak briefly with Rincon Valley superintendent, and then also with Bennett Valley. So having, not having access to data from other districts, I was able to obtain then independent data from other sources, such as the county office, the Department of Education, and other local government, such as the county assessor's office. So the scope was evaluating the state's 9 criteria, which you see here, and I'm going to go through each of these criteria and talk about whether or not, based on the independent data and the information that I collected from your district, whether or not I believe that the criteria has been substantially met. So these 9 criteria are in the education code, and should a petition go forward, the County Committee on School District Organization would need to also evaluate these criteria. They may or may not come to the same conclusion that I have here, but this is a starting point, and hopefully will help you as a board as you make decisions going forward. So just a little bit about process. In the education code, there are different ways to create a petition. And again, this is a study only. There's no petition currently. One way is for all the affected school districts to pass a resolution to unify, and 1 or more of the feeder elementary districts may opt out. So Santa Rosa City Schools, and which includes the high school and the elementary, could unify. Other elementary school districts could also be part of that, or they can opt out. Another way to create a petition is to have a governmental entity such as the city or the county or a special district pass a resolution as a petition. And then the third way is by 25% or more of the registered voters in the area signing a petition. So once there is a petition and it's validated, then a process starts that is set in law. That includes public hearings held within 60 days, a study by the county committee, which is held within 120 days, and then a decision made on whether or not to proceed to an election. If it is set for election, then it would have to pass by a majority of the voters in each of the affected areas. And then after that point, there would be an official start for this new school district, and the old school districts who were involved would dissolve, and the new school district with a new board would then be created. Okay, so let's go through each of these 9 criteria. The first is that there has to be an adequate number of pupils. And the minimum for a unified district is 1,501 pupils. So obviously, to unify even Santa Rosa City Schools with about 16,000 pupils would meet this criteria. If all the districts unified with you, it would be 27,000 pupils. So the criteria would be met. The second criteria is that the unified district would need to be organized based on substantial community identity. And there's a variety of factors that are looked at. And I've listed most of them right here, including the high school's district's boundaries naturally create community identity of the 5 high schools that you're operating. The city of Santa Rosa, while the boundaries of the city do not completely match up with the high school district boundaries, a majority of the city does. And then the high school district boundaries include some unincorporated areas. So there's sphere of influence. There are common zip codes and other government that operate within Santa Rosa. There are shopping areas, there are social recreational areas, there are places of worship, all within Santa Rosa. There are many neighborhoods, and different neighborhoods have different community feel to them. But in the whole, I believe that there's community identity around City of Santa Rosa. And that would also include, of course, the climate, the traffic patterns, and local news. So having studied all these factors, I came to the conclusion that the unification would be formed based on substantial community identity, and that post-unification community ties could be strengthened while preserving the individual neighborhood identities and schools. The third criteria is division of property. Since this unification would combine all the assets of the district and create a new school district, there would be no division, so this criteria is not applicable. The fourth criteria is on discrimination or segregation. The unification would need to preserve the district's ability to educate pupils in an integrated environment and not promote racial or ethnic discrimination or segregation. Unifying or consolidating all the schools provides more ability for the district to continue to educate pupils in an integrated environment. There wouldn't be segregation. There's no separation or segregation that would occur in a unification. The new district area would remain predominantly Hispanic, followed by white. So the conclusion is that the studied unification would preserve the district's ability to educate pupils in an integrated environment and not promote discrimination or segregation. The fifth criteria is there cannot be a significant increase in cost to the state. The studied unification would not cost the state additional funding. In fact, it would save the state approximately $21 million in state funding because of changing eligibility for concentration grant and community or basic aid funding. So therefore, the criteria would be met. The sixth criteria is educational programs. The new district would need to continue to promote sound educational performance and not significantly disrupt the programs of the affected districts. I might note there's no requirement for program improvements, although there are studies, and I cite some of the research in my report, that do point out the benefits of a unified K-12 model of education. Benefits that could include, for example, better articulation, grade transition support, specialized programs and staffing, more support to parents, and having a single student education and information system, as well as enhanced professional development. So in reviewing the data, my conclusion is that this criteria would be met. The seventh criteria is school housing costs. The state says that there should not be any increase in school facilities cost. And in fact, in consolidating the school facilities, there would be no new housing needs or cost as a result. There are 50 school properties that are in this area, and there would not be a need to create new schools as a result of the consolidation. I also looked at the effect on bonding capacity and the effect on the outstanding bonds. Each of the school districts have outstanding bonds. First of all, the bonding capacity would be well below the 5% cap on assessed valuation. And in fact, the district would have $500 million remaining. The outstanding bonds from each of the school districts currently would still continue to be put on the tax rolls for only the taxpayers in those areas. So there'd be no effect on the taxpayers as a result of the unification. And any unspent funds in those areas before the unification would need to be spent on projects in their territory. Only a new bond measure that was be district-wide in a unified district could then be spent as the voters approve that in a new ballot measure. A new developer fee justification study would be needed, but no changes are expected as the same needs exist without regard to unification. So my conclusion is this criteria would be met. The ninth criteria is on property values. It says the petition cannot primarily be designed for increasing property values. 8. So the unification is not contemplated to be designed to increase property values. In fact, the main reason for this study is to answer the question, would unification enhance the instructional opportunity for all students at a similar or reduced cost?
La razón del estudio es saber si la unificación.
And then the last criteria, number 9, is fiscal management and status. This was studied in the first phase. The different funding
El
profiles
estudio fue para determinar si la unificación ayudaría a todos los estudiantes a aprender
of
mejor.
about 21 million, unless state funding is secured legislatively to replace the loss. But the study also found by comparing a district of a similar size to a Santa Rosa Unified, that there is an opportunity to save approximately $45 million through reduction of administrative costs. All of the districts combined spend $12 million more annually on administrative cost than does a school district of a similar size that's unified. Other opportunities to save money include consolidating programs and services and potentially closing underutilized school sites. So for this criteria to be met, there needs to be a reasonable plan put into place in order to ensure a sound fiscal transition for the new district. So my conclusion on the fiscal management is that it would meet the criteria, but only if there is a sound and reasonable financial plan put in place to make sure day one that the new school district is financially healthy. So the conclusion overall, as I may have said at the beginning, is that all of the state's criteria would substantially be met. This is in my opinion, if a realistic financial plan can be developed. There appears to be opportunities to improve educational programs to save money on administrative costs and find other cost-saving efficiencies. The net fiscal benefits of that could be directed back to educational program and other priorities by a new unified district board. So with that, those are my remarks. If you'd like to ask questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Board members, do we have questions? Trustee De La Torre?
Thank you for the report and for taking the time to process this information for our review. Obviously, this is really love these microphones. I know we all do. So at the end of your report, you had mentioned a reasonable plan wouldn't be needed to move forward. Now, is that something that would fall on the responsibility of whom to build that reasonable plan? Whatever district is requesting?
There's no official person or people who would do that, but my recommendation is that whoever designs a petition would need to ensure as part of that petition that there is a reasonable financial plan should the petition, be passed. And I would expect that the electorate, because eventually it does go to election, would also expect that too. So.
And if something this large were to move forward, what is the timeline if all went into play and unification was approved for that new district to be formed,
right,
to be up and running?
Once you have a valid petition, then there are some strict timelines in terms of determining whether or not it's going to move forward. This is a legal area. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not here to give you any legal advice on this. But once an election is called, election is held. If it passes, I believe, in the fall, then by the next July 1, it could be created, the new unified district. There's a time period that's needed to change some of the tax rolls and things like that. Some administrative things that need to happen. But getting to an election is kind of the longest part of these usually. Once you get to an election, if it's approved, then it happens relatively quickly within a year, maybe a year and a half, depending, from my experience.
Thank you, Trustee De La Torre. Trustee Sheffield?
All right. And thank you, Ms. White, for the presentation. I want to be clear with the public, maybe folks who were not following the process when we brought this up last year, but I want to make it really clear that the board's decision to direct the study for full consolidation was based on a number of factors, and some of those factors were brought up in public comment tonight. We considered a year ago the potential cost savings that would offer the greatest amount of resources for educational priorities. This would be the greatest amount of resources going back to the students in all of Santa Rosa, not just Santa Rosa City School District. Another factor that we looked at was the greatest instructional and pupil support services. So enhanced services that all districts have been asking for and needing, particularly coming out of the pandemic. We also considered the ability to enhance facilities, what would be the greatest of the scenarios that we looked at then, and what led us to finalize on scenario 1, the scenario that we're talking about tonight. And then another issue that came about, and it was a lot of discussion that we had, was the scenario that would not promote racial or ethnic discrimination or segregation, meaning promoting community ties that could strengthen and preserve the neighborhoods that we have in Santa Rosa. I wanted to point out some of the public comment tonight. The two that I want to just maybe open it up for discussion. One is community identity, and the other is the cost savings to the state, and potentially cost savings for the entire school community. The community identity a criterion that we looked at, which number 2, slide 7, and in the study, this is covered from page 13 to page 20. And I really just want to reinforce to folks to look at the study itself and look at the factors and inputs that went into what would be preserving these communities. And I point that out because it was brought up in public comment, but this is also what I hear when I talk to folks in the community. You know, we have neighborhood schools. We've traditionally had neighborhood schools in throughout the city, but we don't necessarily follow that. And that unfortunately leads to a loss of maybe neighborhood identity. And again, if we're talking about preserving the school community, I mean, I think of my neighborhood and I think of where my neighbors' kids go to school. There's a lot of kids in my neighborhood, and there's 2 of them that go to my kids' school. The rest of them go to other schools around the district. For various reasons, of course. But that means, for me, it means that, you know, my kids, they'll play after school, but they really don't have much in common with what they're looking at day to day in school, in the classroom, right? The other criterion that I wanted us to maybe discuss is the cost, and it was brought up about reduced bureaucratic processes. And, you know, this would do this. This scenario would do it more so with a $21 million savings to the state. That's $21 million redirected, again, to the areas that I think all districts would find important. I guess, you know, I do have a question, but I wanted to open those 2 up for greater discussion because it was brought up tonight. But my question around both of these criteria is that we had lack of participation from the other districts in the study. This school district asked for this study, not because we want to take over or absorb the other districts. It's not that. It's that we're the largest, and these schools feed into ours, and it's about preparing our students at all levels to when they ultimately come to us in middle or high school. And we could do that a lot better. We could align that a lot better if we had more dollars to spread around. I'm going to stop there because I know that these are the 2 that I want to really focus on in discussion, and I will come back to those with questions, but I wanted to put that out there for the public that is following this early on in the meeting. This meeting could drag on, as our meetings tend to do, but I wanted to put that out there at the onset. So thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Sheffield. Trustee Manieri?
Thank you. I too want to have that conversation, but I did have a question, and we may have discussed this when we last had this conversation, but the cost savings analysis that has been presented to us now a couple times, does that include districts potentially opting out, or is this kind of an inclusive number that we're seeing here?
Right. The number that you see here is for all of the school districts unifying together. So none of the districts opting out. To the extent that districts opt out, there would be less cost savings.
I have a follow-up question to that. So is there a way to, I know it's not included in here, but is there a way to find out what the cost, the difference in cost will be as districts opt out?
Yes, yes, those calculations could be made. Yes. Mhm.
Trustee De La Cruz?
Thank you so much for this report and for the information tonight. I think I'm similarly concerned about opting out. In your experience, what are the conditions that lead to certain districts opting out? And do you read anything from kind of the lack of participation in this study that raises any concerns to you about districts opting out?
I can't speak for the districts that didn't participate or those that opt out. It is allowed in the law for them to opt out. And so those are local decisions, I assume, that each school board would make on their own.
I still look at you, sorry.
No, just don't press it.
You. One of the other kind of criteria that I'd like to raise, which I thought was very well covered in your presentation, and which I appreciated a lot, was kind of the criteria number 6 around articulation and educational programs that are available in Santa Rosa City schools that could be made available to other smaller districts that don't have that same ability to bring those resources to bear. And so I just wanted to lift up, and of course, I just lost my place in this thing here. Some of those programs that are available and some of the benefits around curriculum articulation. So to Trustee Sheffield's point, the ways in which we create alignment and coherence of curriculum standards and expectations across districts, especially as we kind of receive and understand the differences and what different kids across our communities are experiencing as a result of whether or not those supports are available to them in those lower elementary and middle feeder districts. I think the other thing that I wanted to lift up is in particular for children who kind of exist on the margins, this particularly English language learners and other kids in these smaller feeder districts that don't have access to the kinds of programs that Santa Rosa City currently does. The benefits to some of those districts and to those kids being able to access those additional resources in a potential unified district feels really important to lift up. This is particularly in criteria number 6, pages 36 and 37, including kind of career technical education, educational foundations, and then of course, some of the magnet programs or the things that attract kids to our district at the high school level. On 38, I really wanted to lift up, our entire wellness and engagement department that supports students and families, the benefits of a common student information system that allows us as a unified district to really be able to help with student placement and educational success, and ultimately higher educational accountability across the district as a whole. The other thing that I did want to mention that I appreciated also being covered very clearly in your report was that there is still significant continuing segregation, both race and class, throughout all of the districts, throughout our community as a whole, as a result of kind of historical segregation and historical policies around, where folks could live and who could buy houses. And so we still see the echoes of that every day in our districts, and really appreciate the way that the criterion around ensuring that we are not continuing segregation. And in fact, we are working very hard to integrate our schools in the ways in which folks working for many years to address the harmful effects of segregation and policies that discriminated against communities of color. This is an ongoing effort to continue to address and remedy that ongoing discrimination or the effects of it that we continue to see. I think the last question that I had was, what does the process for developing a reasonable financial plan with districts? Is that, can you talk a little bit about what that looks like in your experience? Because the combination of a reasonable financial plan with multiple districts seems like it's going to be a really fun effort.
Well, I can only suggest what I might do if I were in your shoes or someone's shoes that had to do this. Obviously, it's an exercise in numbers, so I would get the accountants involved to really, figure out how much revenue would this new district have? What are our expenditures? And, where are we needing to make cuts day one? There's some areas that are probably going to be easy, such as administration, when you have, 10 administrative offices and boards and all of that. But others are going to be more difficult, particularly classified staff that have a 2-year right to their same pay and salary after a reorganization. The new considerations would be made about salaries and benefits and the use of facilities, and all of those have a price tag to them. Keeping in mind the ultimate goal to come out of it better than going into it, and to use those net savings to improve the new board's priorities.
Just press it once.
Thank you. I also wanted to just kind of lift up something that kind of flowed throughout your report, which I also appreciated, which is recognizing how top heavy so many small districts creates, that kind of large pull down in terms of, as you mentioned, multiple boards and the cost for multiple boards and multiple high level administrators and many smaller districts. And so figuring out how we're really directing those funds back to the education of students feels like something I just wanted to lift up and add on to what Director Sheffield was mentioning. Thank you so much.
Director Sheffield.
Thank you. There was one area that the study had pointed out was the study suggests that there would be better coordination from school to school around consolidation that could help students transition from elementary to middle to high school. And so I know last year it was brought up about doing a really in-depth study to see where students are coming from other districts, and sort of follow them as they transition into city schools and see where or are there challenges in this transition. Are they academically prepared when they transition to our schools? And I'm not sure if we've started to look at that. It would be, I know, a very comprehensive study, but I think that could give us a little bit of insight if in fact what the study suggests about students benefiting, would they benefit academically?
Thank you for the question, Trustee Sheffield. So I think where we're at in that process is looking at where students are coming from and where they're going to. Given the fact that we have new data around achievement through CASP testing and other data, we could get started on looking on that next level. We were just really at the identification, where are they coming from and where are they going to. Mm-hmm.
Maybe comparing that to where we are now, I don't know what type of communication takes place from those other schools or the other districts, when those students are transferring, how do we align our curriculum? Is it aligned at all? Is there any discussion around that curriculum design, maybe at the middle school and high school levels?
So I have, sorry. Earlier in the fall, I work regularly with the other 8 districts and appreciate all of my colleagues that I collaborate with. And one of the things that I mentioned is that for matriculation purposes, it's really important for us to meet with their teams and to understand what educational programs look like, what their restorative and mental health supports look like, what are their academic programs and interventions look like, because all of the students converge with us in 7th grade. And if we're going to serve the needs of our students, we're going to need to understand the programs and services that students are receiving so that we can complement that. And I have reached out to all of the districts, and we're just beginning to schedule some of those conversations and opportunities.
I have De La Torre next. Do we have any other board members that want to speak after Trustee De La Torre? Trustee?
So it's been brought up a couple times already, and I just want to be really cognizant that we keep this at the forefront during this process of the time and costs that would need to be invested to move forward. Whatever district wants to be the head of the spear on this project will need to put a lot of time and energy and money into developing a reasonable plan for the other side. So making sure that there's plenty of checks and balances. Does the reward sustain what the risk would be required to move forward? So I just want to reiterate that's been brought up a couple times, and I want us to all be aware of that and continue to think about that to be the best stewards of what's in front of us. Director Shepard, what you brought up about community identity is also a really big, important piece of this conversation. And as a native Santa Rosan, when I was a child, I went to so many different schools growing up. I didn't necessarily know what school district they were part of as a child. I just know I went to the school, whether it was the school down the street or when I went to that school and there were too many students there and I had to go to a different school. You have 13 grades, K through 12, and I went to 14 different schools. And I couldn't tell you what all those elementary schools districts they were part of. But when you say Santa Rosa, there are so many different ties to the community as I'm looking at the variety of factors that create community identity. There are many people in this community that don't say, I live in Santa Rosa. They say, I live in Rincon Valley. I live in Bennett Valley. I live in Larkfield. I live in Fountain Grove. I live in Skyhawk. I live in Countryside. I live in Copperfield. So whether it is a geographical region like Rincon Valley and Bennett Valley or a neighborhood that's popularized by name, that's a community identity. And where it got confusing for a lot of the community is Rincon Valley Middle School is part of the Santa Rosa City School District. But there might be community members that are going to contact the Rincon Valley School District just by naming, they assume it's the same district. So just adding some clarity and making sure the education's out there, that we're doing the best we can to provide the best opportunities for our children for that education.
Thank you, Trustee De La Torre. And to that, I'm just going to say that we have other cities, that do have neighborhoods like San Francisco. You have the Mission District, right? But the Mission District is within the San Francisco Unified School District. So there are ways to keep that community, that sense of community. And I just want to mention that, change is scary. I understand that this is a sort of, big ask, right? But I think if the responsibility falls on us as elected officials to make sure that funds, okay? Because before I go with that train of thought, just to be clear, if that were to happen, we will no longer be trustees of this board, right? We will create a new school board of education, right? The citizens will vote for the new board of education. So this is not securing, a place of, power This comes out of a place of making sure our funding goes to our students. Period. And I understand that we're talking about people's jobs, especially talking about, the night superintendents that we have out there, right, in our feeder schools. I understand this is like a scary sort of thing to do. But as a person of color, as an immigrant to this, community, right, seeing the vast amount of money being, I don't want to say siphoned away, but being used in other ways that could directly influence the educational opportunities of our students, it's something that we need to take into our hands and make sure that we have the responsibility to make sure our students, our Santa Rosa City students, have the ability to have a place where funding goes to them and not to a select few. And I know these words are going to ruffle some feathers, right? But I mean, we have a few people out there that are earning, quite a bit of money. We have 9 superintendents earning over more than what the state, the governor of the state of California is making, right? Yes, we are talking about their salaries. We are talking about consolidating those funds and making sure that this goes to the people that need it the most, right? So I needed to say that because, I mean, we've been dancing around this for a long time. And I think a lot of the resistance I'm hearing out there, it's because we're so entrenched into what we used to, instead of looking at what could be. The ability to change, it comes with great strife. But I want to make sure that, when we start talking about this, we talk about it in terms of equity and access to our students, regardless what happens to us. Because I probably won't be here by the time that happens. I will probably be voted out, right? Who knows? But the idea is our responsibility is to make sure our students, because let me ask you this, do they eventually come to our district? Most of them, right? So these are our students, regardless of what district or feeder district they go to. So we have to start thinking in ways of how can we make sure that our funding, our state taxes go to those students instead of a select few. That was me. Do we have anyone else? No. Trustee Manieri and then Trustee Sheffield.
It's hard to follow that ever. Completely agree with everything you said. I have kind of been wrestling with this cost savings analysis, especially understanding that districts opting out would have that would have an impact on this bottom line, on this number. And I also understand that we didn't have any participation from other districts. That Santa Rosa City Schools was the only district that fully participated. And we have heard from other districts in past conversations, smaller feeder districts that are excited about the idea of consolidation. And so I would like to know if there's an opportunity to revisit that, to maybe better understand during the, I think a lot of things have also changed since the last time maybe they were asked to participate. There have been, school districts who have had to make really big drastic financial decisions in our community, and maybe they're in a different place and maybe would be willing to talk to us at this time about consolidation. So I'm just wondering if there's still an opportunity to do that, or if we've kind of gone past that.
Well, I mean, this board is able to study whichever configuration they would like. The Sonoma County Office of Education contracted with me to do one evaluation, one scenario. So this is it. But on your own independently, clearly you could study different scenarios on which districts opt out and which don't.
Trustee Sheffield?
I'm just wondering, and you do these studies for other districts, and I want to ask a question around credibility for folks who might not believe the findings in the study. I mean, there were, going through it, there didn't seem to be any reasons why we wouldn't move in this direction. I mean, I go back to maybe what started this conversation in 2011. This was a grand jury report that said, yes, better education, and that should be the sole purpose for consolidation, not cost savings. But this study shows both. And I want to get back to that credibility part of it, and your experience working with other districts that have looked at these same conditions, these same factors. We need to start somewhere, and I think that starting somewhere is with a trust to the constituency, to the people of Santa Rosa. And I don't know where we begin. Maybe it's probably begins with bringing some of those other districts on board and to have this discussion that we need to have.
This conversation is really a sensitive conversation for a lot of reasons. And in my experience in public education, I experienced a unification in a set of districts in North Sacramento. And there were definitely a set of circumstances that led to that unification. And these were 4 districts, 3 elementary and 1 secondary, who merged together. And having gone through that and witnessed that process, there were definitely growing pains that you're not going to get away from that. However, for the first time as a unified district, we were able to talk from pre-K to 12th grade what a child's experience was going to be like together. And we were opening up dialogue that had really been a divide between 6th grade and 7th grade, with kids leaving systems in 6th grade and then starting the next round of kids without continued conversations of what happens next for them. In Santa Rosa City Schools, we talk about the ownership of students who graduate is not just on the high schools. Our children should be seen as graduates from pre-K. And so what does that mean in ownership in all of our districts combined, which is why I'm very interested to have those discussions with my colleagues in the spring, because whether this unification study happens or not, our children and our families are the ones who are experiencing these transitions, depending on their entry or their exit. And we have to remember their experience and how we provide seamless support, if possible, for our children and our families. And we have the ability to control that. We have the ability to work together to understand our educational programs, whether a unification study happens or not, which we already know will take time. I don't want to wait and see what happens. I want to be able to serve the students that aren't technically in our district yet and be able to forward plan for them. We cannot wait for them to be a 7th grader in our district to understand what they need. So I am looking forward to the conversations to learn more so that we can be better prepared.
Trustee McNally.
So my background is as a middle school teacher. So I just wanted to elevate a couple things I've heard that resonate with my experience because I've taught in unified districts. And one thing is that vertical alignment and that communication between 6th and 7th grade. I've been a 7th grade English teacher, and having that is a huge benefit when I'm receiving those students. And I've had contact with their previous school site, their previous teachers, both about what they learned, but also just about who those kids are. That's been really beneficial. And then also a lot of what Vice President Flores was talking about with the funding. All that money that we could save is money that could potentially go back to increase salaries, increase staffing, things that, have such a great benefit to students. Students do well in smaller classes. They do well when their teachers are doing well, when their teachers are happy and not stretched thin. They do better when they have access to counselors and mental health resources. And so the thing that's most exciting to me about this idea is that in the long term, we could potentially be putting more money, more resources into those things that directly benefit students.
Thank you, Trustee McNally. Anybody else? Trustee Sheffield. Yes, you are. Go ahead.
Ms. White, I'm wondering, we don't have a whole lot of case study in California, but how and what we may expect from the state in the short-term financing if something like this were to happen. We know that the state, we know that this governor has talked about the need for, due to declining enrollment, a number of other reasons, but for consolidating school districts. We have 40 in Sonoma County. We know that there are a few counties, not many, that have more districts than we do, but some type of incentive. What could we expect from the state incentive-wise to help us?
Well, I'm not sure you're asking the right person that question. I don't work in Sacramento, but most recently, the legislative analyst did a study and decided not to provide incentives for school consolidation, similar to those that had been provided historically up until they changed the funding model. But that doesn't mean that it couldn't be re-examined at some point. And people who do regularly work with the legislature and run bills in Sacramento for school funding and adequacy of funding, that it couldn't be something that would be taken up in the future. But as of now, there's nothing that I'm aware of that would provide any financial incentive or relief from any revenue shortfall that might occur if you were to unify and help you with this financial plan.
I just have a follow-up question. Is there a way that we can go back to our feeder schools and engage in a conversation? I know they opted not to be fully involved except for two, to continue the discussion before, because we know this is not a petition to unify, but it would be important for us to have a candid discussion, right? This doesn't necessarily mean we're going that route, but the fact that we have all these districts that decided not to participate, to me, sends a strong message of not wanting to be part of it because of, well, I won't mention the reasons because they may have their own particular reasons, but personally, I feel like we could essentially try to bring this to a place where we can actually discuss it without having the fear of losing something or an identity. So do you need direction from us to go back to the district and say, can we re-engage and talks to make sure that we're doing this for the students, put ourselves to the side, okay? And how can we better serve our students? If this unification could work, what would it take? So is this something we can ask you to do again, or since your report is very thorough, thank you. Is this something that it's out of the question?
Well, my role is finished now. So I've concluded the study. I work for the County Office of Education. I mean, clearly the district can go any direction that you
Right.
would like. You can hire your own to look at it and help you along that way. So it's really a district decision on what the next step is for you.
Thank you. That answers my question. Trustee Sheffield.
So follow-up question. So that would be on us if we wanted to hire a consultant. It couldn't be something that comes from SCO. SCO?
It's my boss sitting back there.
You're gonna have to share the microphone. Thank you.
We're happy to bring that feedback back to Dr. Carter and go from there.
Okay, and the reason why I asked that question again is because we don't have participation, and that to me signifies just an unwillingness. And I get that, and for whatever reasons, that's true. But when we look at what is necessary for a petition to unify, I mean, I think it really does start with education and getting the community on board. I mean, there are steps, identified steps that I do want to make sure we go away with tonight, having gone through those steps, but really starts with education and input, from the other districts. I think the study had pointed out maybe one opt-out, but there's not a whole lot of room there for what we asked for, which was full, our scenario one, our full unification. So can we go over the steps again really clearly, what it would take to petition, I guess, for unification? And it would start with a resolution that this board would pass, is that, or I guess it could be any.
Right. Well, there's different ways to create a petition. It is a legal process, and I recommend that you consult with an attorney on the process.
Okay.
I can give you an overview.
Yeah.
One way is all of the affected school districts who would be part of the proposed unification, their boards would need to pass a resolution to unify or to opt out by a majority board vote, but all affected districts would need to do that
Have to be on board.
or opt out.
Okay.
A different avenue or route is to have another governmental agency within this area, such as a special district, a city, county, to pass a resolution to unify. That would start a petition that would go to the County Committee on School District Organization to review.
I believe the last time we had one in the state, it was a state senator. Is that correct? Who made, okay.
And then the third,
A state senator, I believe, was the last time the state had attempted a consolidation. I want to believe, yeah.
and then the third would be a citizen's petition. So there'd be a group of citizens that would want to unify 2 or more of the school districts in this area, and petitions would be circulated. 25% or more of the registered voters would need to sign the petition in each of the affected school districts that would be involved, and it would need to be validated by the county clerk. And that
Wait,
would,
hold on, 25% from each district.
that's affected by, or that is included within it. So if
Got it.
and then those petitions would be validated by the county clerk to ensure that they are in fact registered voters in that area.
Okay.
And then that would trigger the next steps in the process.
Okay, so then it goes to the voters.
No,
Okay,
it goes to the County Committee on School District Organization.
Yep.
Which is a separate body.
Right.
And then they would be obligated to hold public hearings in each of the affected school districts. They would be required to study the 9 criteria that I've studied here and determine in their opinion, not my opinion,
Right.
in their opinion, whether each of the criteria is substantially met or not. And then it would be their decision whether to move the petition forward to an election.
Okay, so then they move it forward and then we vote?
And then, yes.
Okay,
they-
so the reason why I'm trying to get to the point where we vote, this is a really long process. This isn't something that's going to happen in a year, 2 years, 3 years. This is a really long multi-year process. And it also has to be timed around elections, right? There's also it would be the need for, let's say the voters pass it, right? Then we need to figure out districting, trustee areas, right? We would assume that that just as we on San Rosa City School Board, we had to go through a districting and then a redistricting process, the way that cities in the county have had to do the same thing, that would be another part of this process that would also take an amount of time, right?
That would typically be on the ballot at the time of the election, that
Yeah.
there would be these trustee areas.
Yeah,
too.
and then after that, the whole formation of what this district might look like as far as a superintendent, as far as, we would assume that there wouldn't be a whole lot of loss of staffing, at least at the instructional level, on the campus level, certainly not. But that's a long process too.
Well, once the election is held, then the voters have decided there is a new unified school district, and it would be effective
The
the
next
following
fiscal year.
fiscal year. So it's not like you can sit back and
So all
say,
these
"We're
things
not gonna-"
have to be done. It makes
So
sure
all
that
the
we,
advanced planning should be done really in the petition phase.
7 months. Yeah. Okay. So just to get a sense of everything, all the steps that need to take place. And maybe Anna, since you were a little bit more familiar with, it was the last time something like this happened in the state, how long was that entire process from discussion to actually fruition? If you recall.
So the discussions went on for over 10 years at first. And then the actual process took 2. It was it was a different time. The state was able to step in and provide some financial support in the bridge. We also didn't lose funds at that time. It was a little bit different. The legislation has changed since 2008. We all started with all of our district office staff. There were very few reductions on the first year, and then the cuts started to happen in the ongoing years.
And just to be clear, and I got you, the voters eventually decide, and right, whether or not to unify, instead of a few gatekeepers making those decisions for the populace, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite
So
understand you.
eventually, the voters get to decide whether or not to unify, right? It's up to our citizenship to vote on that, right? Not necessarily up to a few gatekeepers who may not want to do this for whatever reason. So I just want to reiterate the fact that eventually, if you're going to have a sense, if voters feel like they're going to lose a sense of community, right? If they're going to lose a sense of neighborhood, right? That this will be their decision, not ours. It'll be their decision, right? So I just wanted to make sure that is out there. That is not us making the ultimate decision, right? We want to make sure that people have this say as to what happens in terms of how to spend state funding and your tax dollars. And if we want to spend that into making sure that it goes directly to the students, right? So I just want to reiterate the fact that we're doing this for the best interest of all of our Santa Rosa City School students and all of our students within Santa Rosa. Trustee De La Torre.
Thank you, Vice President Flores. Very well said. And I just want to, we've talked about this is a very long process. It could be a very long process. None of this is happening by the end of this school year by any means. So the end game would be a very long process to get to this. And then you'd have the clarity of one large school district trying to provide the best educational opportunities to all these students. what my minimal ask tonight would be is that we use this as an encouraging opportunity to have conversations with the districts to ensure we are aligning. What can we do now together as we have these discussions and to have these processes? What can we do together to better opportunities for these students? Because these feeder schools end up in the Santa Rosa City School High School District. They end up in the high school districts. And as a parent in this district, I have seen opportunities where children may have had other opportunities at an elementary school level that don't align by the time we get to high school because other feeder districts may have not provided the same opportunities. So what can we do collaboratively? How are we working at this collaboratively to best prepare our students from TK on so that everybody has an amazing high school experience and is the most prepared to go out into this world educated with our best foot forward in whatever direction they choose. So at a bare minimum, my ask is to use this as an encouragement. We're not trying to take anything away. Nobody's trying to take anything away. We're trying to build something better. And how do we do that together? It's just not one side of the conversation. We all have to be a part of it.
Thank you, Trustee De La Torre. Any other comments or questions from our board members? Yes, Trustee De La Cruz.
So in terms of next steps, I really appreciate the questions, Trustee Sheffield. And thank you so much for the guidance and the experience from other districts. I would love to understand, I think from Anna as well as from Dr. Carter at SCO, what does it look like? What are next steps possible for us to consider? For the hiring of our consultants, of any facilitators to facilitate conversations with other districts, any materials that will help voters in our districts and constituents in our multiple districts right now understand. I think as you really beautifully articulated it, kind of the fiscal responsibility that we feel we have to not leave $21 million on the table that could go to increase salaries, to improve educational outcomes for all of our students in the larger city. I think also making sure that we're consulting with our attorneys on the best next steps for our process, and would just request to have some of that information come back for a future public conversation and any action items if necessary that we need to take.
So before we adjourn, I would like to hear from our Superintendent Trinnell. What have you taken away from this meeting, and what the next steps are?
Thank you. So overall, and again, as I emphasized earlier, having gone through this experience, I want to just continue to underscore what has been shared repeatedly, is that it's really important to us to think about how we serve our students and our families in the community. I think that's ultimately the center of why this even came up. So my takeaway tonight is to continue, one, to reinforce and follow up with my fellow colleagues of the feeder districts so that we can continue to have conversations around those educational experiences that students are coming with, and also an opportunity for us to share what's in store for their students that come to us and become ours, essentially. So that's number one. Number two, I will follow up with Dr. Carter on what potential next steps could look like to continue dialogue and maybe an extension of this study to really be able to understand where other districts are coming from. And I think under that will also include what literature, what information do our communities need to know about the process itself. Because if they're not paying attention to a board meeting, they may not understand what the discussion is about. So, and then I will also make sure I follow up with our attorneys to see what information we can bring back to the board.
Thank you, Superintendent Trinnell. Any last comments from anybody before we adjourn? Go ahead.
I did. Thank you, Vice President Flores, for the opportunity. For kind of 2 points of clarification. To date, the action that SCO has taken to complete this study was based on kind of direction and the existing timeline, including significant financial resources over 6 figures to complete this study through Ms. White and her team's expertise. So the revisiting this study would, while certainly, as Ms. White mentioned, could be accomplished at a district level. I think from my office's perspective as SCO's business kind of advisor, further financial investment may not be possible, and otherwise would substantially likely result in the same financial analysis. And in terms of a financial analysis, for clarification, the $21 million that's been discussed tonight would not be sent. So the combined dollar amount that is currently sent to Santa Rosa City Schools and the feeder districts is $21 million more than a scenario if unification were to proceed. So not 21 million, I'm sorry. What exists now is 21 million more. What exists under this unification study would be 21 million less. So I think that's again kind of a distinction that I think Ms. White pointed out. Yes, cost savings on top, but from a revenue side, there's just 21 million that will no longer be sent. So in large part, kind of related to SCO's financial investments to the study to date, I think that result is clear. And so any kind of further permutations around different possibilities could certainly be undertaken by this board, joint board meetings with other districts. But SCO's portion of the study, as based on existing action, has concluded.
Just to be clear, there's a $29 million loss immediately, right? Within a 21, within a fiscal year, right? But the long-term analysis shows that. I want him to finish the sentence. I'm sorry.
Yeah, to clarify, yes, because the way the funding models work, on day one, there would be a $21 million loss.
Right.
But in the long term, there could be an estimated $45 million in cost savings. So the net would be like 24 million positive. And that's why the financial planning would be needed, because there's this fiscal cliff until such time as the district's able to right size itself. And then into the future, hopefully have some additional resources towards your priorities. So
I just wanted to reiterate that because I didn't want to end the meeting with we're going to have a $21 million loss, right? The cost saving analysis shows that eventually we'll have a net savings of $24 million, right? So
estimated, obviously,
estimated, right?
Yes.
So with a very thorough, fiscal analysis, and I get that, okay? So I just wanted to reiterate that before closing. Any other remarks before we close the meeting? Yes, Superintendent Chanel, and
Go ahead.
Trustee Sheffield, go ahead.
Okay, so I want to get back to that financial part because it $21 million initial loss. And again, the reason why I brought up maybe scenarios where the state has helped bridge that in the transition period, then it would be a $24 million positive fiscal gain, but a cost savings of 45 million annually could be realized. Is that?
That was based on comparing what a Santa Rosa unified would be to other unified districts in the state of a similar size and with a similar kind of demographics and funding. What their operating budgets look like is $45 million less than what the combined operating budgets of the 10 districts are in this area. Okay, so we know 12 million is being spent more on administration compared to a district of a similar size. So that's one area where it's obvious. And then there's 50 school sites compared to, an average of 32 school sites in other districts of a similar size. So that was the way the analysis was done, is if you were a unified district with 27,000 students, what would your budget look like compared to others in the state?
Thank you.
Superintendent Trinnell.
I just want to make sure it's emphasized that we appreciate the support from SCO and the work that's done. And Christy, thank you. It's been a pleasure working with you, and I know the team also reflects that. You have been so thoughtful, and your questions were just perfectly targeted at the information needed. And so thank you for your work and collaborating with us on this effort. And again, SCO, thank you for supporting this effort as well.
Thank you. Having no other comments from the board here, meeting adjourned.